The story begins with Terrence Blake, a quiet and composed black soldier in a clean army uniform boarding a flight. He's an unassuming presence, but a few passengers notice him, some with a hint of disapproval. He takes his assigned first-class seat, 1A, and calmly sits, hands folded. The lead flight attendant, Miss Danning, approaches him, her voice loud and accusatory. She assumes he's in the wrong seat, despite his calm assurance that he isn't. When she sees his ticket, she mutters, "This has to be a mistake," and continues to question his right to be there, saying, "You people always think you can get away with anything." A hush falls over the cabin, and then, in front of everyone, she slaps him. Terrence doesn't react. He stands up slowly, picks up his backpack, and walks towards the cockpit door, his face showing no emotion, but a quiet focus. Ms. Danning, stunned by his lack of reaction, watches as he knocks on the cockpit door. The captain, Captain Rollins, immediately recognizes him and addresses him as Lieutenant Colonel Blake. Terrence steps inside and hands the captain a small, encrypted case. After reading the message on a secure tablet, the captain's eyes widen, and he immediately contacts ground control. He announces a FAA-level concern on board and orders the entire plane to remain grounded. With the plane grounded, a sense of tension fills the cabin. The passengers, initially confused, begin to realize this isn't a typical delay. Ms. Ganning, now uneasy, returns to the front galley. A junior flight attendant, Brian, cautiously asks her about the man in uniform, pointing out that his ticket matched his seat. She dismisses him, insisting it's a small issue. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Rollins informs Terrence that the FAA has confirmed his authority to ground the plane. A compliance officer will be dispatched to meet them upon arrival, and a full report is required. Terrence asks the captain to tell the passengers the delay is on him. When Terrence returns to his seat, a quiet shift has occurred. His calm presence is no longer just noticed, it feels heavy and commanding. Passengers who had remained silent during the incident are now tense. Ms. Danning, shaken, receives a call from the captain over the intercom, summoning her to the cockpit. She learns that the FAA is aware of the incident and that a physical assault against a federal officer has occurred. She is instructed to immediately return to Terrence's seat and issue a public apology in front of witnesses. Ms. Danning returns to the cabin, her once confident demeanor replaced by shaky steps. She approaches Terrence, her shoes no longer clicking with authority. In a dry, rehearsed voice, she apologizes for the misunderstanding. Terrence, however, presses her. He calmly reminds her that he had a valid ticket and that her actions were not a mistake, but a choice. He asks her to apologize for what she is truly sorry for. Cornered, she finally admits that she assumed he didn't belong in first class because of how he looked. Her quiet admission hangs in the air, a devastating truth. Terrence simply acknowledges her apology and tells her to go do your job. As she walks back, her face is flushed with a new kind of shame. The passengers, who witness the entire exchange, are now uncomfortable. They begin whispering, their initial confusion giving way to a shared sense of unease and guilt. They realize they sat in silence while the incident unfolded. The captain's voice comes over the intercom, confirming the delay is due to a compliance protocol, making it clear to everyone that the flight is grounded because of what has just happened. The tension in the cabin grows as the minutes tick by. Passengers begin to feel the weight of their own silence, the guilt of not having intervened. Meanwhile, Ms. Danning is summoned to the cockpit again. Captain Rollins informs her that the FAA is elevating the case and that federal officers will be waiting at the gate to escort her for questioning. She is instructed not to speak to anyone else, especially Terrence. The gravity of her situation finally sinks in. Outside, a black SUV with government plates pulls up to the gate, and two suited figures with FAA badges are seen waiting. A woman in row 2 leans forward and quietly apologizes to Terrence for not speaking up earlier. He accepts her apology with a quiet nod, his calm presence continuing to compel others to confront their own inaction. Finally, the plane door unlatches, and an FAA officer and a man in a dark suit board. They bypass all the passengers and go directly to Terrence. The female officer, with a respectful tone, identifies him as Colonel Blake and states that he will be escorted off the aircraft last. They then turn to the back of the plane and approach a visibly shaken Miss Danning. With all eyes on her, she is formally told to step off the plane immediately for questioning. She passes Terrence's seat, making eye contact with him for a brief moment before exiting the aircraft. With Miss Danning removed, the plane is filled with a collective sigh of relief, though the atmosphere remains heavy with reflection. The captain comes over the intercom and states that the delay was caused by a failure of respect and that it will be formally recorded. The statement further solidifies in the passengers' minds that the event was not a minor mishap, but a serious infraction. As disembarkation begins, passengers are called row by row. Many pass Terrence's seat with a nod or a quiet word, their initial silence now replaced with a sense of personal accountability. Brian, the junior flight attendant, approaches Terrence and thanks him for handling the situation with such grace, telling him that his calm demeanor did more than shouting ever could. After all the other passengers have left, Terrence is the last to exit the plane. He is met on the jet bridge by the same FAA officers. When asked if he'd like to make a statement, he simply says, "I didn't come here to teach anyone a lesson. I just came to sit in my assigned seat." He is then led to a private debriefing area. Meanwhile, a separate meeting is taking place, where the airline's compliance officer questions Ms. Danning. She finally confesses that she assumed he didn't belong in first class because he didn't look like someone who flew first class. Her words are recorded, sealing the official reason for the incident. The following day, a short clinical article appears online, and a passenger's 18-second silent video of Ms. Danning being escorted off the plane goes viral. The footage, without any narration or music, speaks for itself. It captures the shame and quiet authority that defined the moment. The public's reaction is swift and powerful. People aren't just reacting to the injustice, they are reckoning with their own potential silence. Under immense public pressure, the airline issues a formal public apology, admitting that a decorated officer was humiliated. They announce an immediate overhaul of crew training, a new passenger rights policy, and the termination of Ms. Danning. The FAA also makes a public statement, calling the incident a systemic warning and confirming that compliance doesn't stop at safety equipment, it extends to dignity. Terrence, now back in his government lodging, quietly watches the news. He receives an envelope from the airline, which includes a formal apology and an invitation to join an advisory board for future training programs. He declines, telling the messenger, "Tell them to change the policy. That's the only apology that matters." He wants to see real change, not just an empty gesture. Months pass and the media attention fades, but the impact of the incident remains. The story of Flight 263 becomes a case study in ethics classes, a lesson for new airline crews, and a quiet conversation among passengers. Terrence, meanwhile, keeps a low profile, declining interviews and avoiding the spotlight. He agrees to a request from a private flight academy to speak to a class of first-generation pilots. He tells them he stayed still on the plane not because I was weak, but because I wanted the system to reveal itself. He emphasizes that silence isn't surrender, and that sometimes you have to let the consequences do the speaking. The ripple effect continues. The airline industry finds itself under a brighter light, with passengers filming more and flight attendants becoming more aware of the professional and personal cost of bias. In a surprising turn, Ms. Danning submits a handwritten letter to the airline's internal forum. She confesses that she assumed Terrence didn't belong and that her behavior was rooted in her own fear of losing control. She ends by admitting that his stillness revealed everything she needed to see about herself. The story of Flight 263 eventually fades from the news, but its lessons endure. An artist at a flight school paints a mural of a grounded plane with its shadow rising into the clouds with the words, "He sat, we stood." At an airline conference, a senior executive acknowledges that the company lost altitude that day because of ego, not turbulence.